You probably did not bring your balloon with you, but you probably did bring your comfort zone with you. And we all have them, and we all use them. And sometimes it's legitimate. Our fears are legitimate, and sometimes they are simply something that holds us back. So today we're going to talk about, we're continuing our Live Strong Without Cheating series. If you did not get a band and you'd like one, there are some others out in the hall there in the box, and we'll try to make sure those are available. I've never worn one of these before, so I wasn't sure if I could wear it or not. And I've had a couple people say, man, I just can't wear something around my wrist like that, or it kind of makes me sweat or feels uncomfortable. That's fine. You know, one guy actually put it around his ankle because his was too big, and so it kept falling off or whatever, so he just stuck it around his ankle. But the other side of it is, it isn't about wearing this. It's about living strong without cheating. That's what it is. I have been surprised at how often, whenever a discouraging thought or some other kind of thought that wasn't really something that I felt like I probably should embrace would come through my mind, and somehow I would think about wearing this, and I would think, if I make that choice or if I allow that thought to sit here much longer, that's not choosing to live strong. And so it has been, I have found it to be a bit of a reminder to me. And I had to snap my wrist a couple of times, just like, okay, boy, live strong without compromising. And so, if it's helped to you, great. If it's not, that's fine. You give it to your kids to play with. But it's here for you just as a reminder through the series if you'd like to participate in even the visual form of wearing it or using it. I had a joke told me on the way in this morning, and so I'm going to share it with you with Tom's permission. There's a lot of Toms, so you don't know which Tom it was or wasn't. But I was sitting in the lobby, and there were like 4 Toms right there in like one area. So it's like Mike. We have a bunch of Mikes around here too, and that kind of thing. So anyway, there were 3 gentlemen who were up for the firing squad, and one was Irish, and one was English, and one was Polish. So they brought the Irishman up in front of the firing squad, and he's standing there, and he thought, well, I got to do something fast. This is going to be over, And so he yelled, avalanche. All the guys in the fire squad turned around, and he escaped, he ran off. So they brought up the, did I say English for the first one? Anyway, whichever it was. Then they brought up the Irishman, okay? Irishman standing there, and he's thinking, man, I gotta think fast. And so he said, flood. And the guys all turned around, and he ran off, escaped. And so the Polish guy came up, and he's standing there, he goes, man, they both accomplished this. I gotta think fast. And so he was thinking, he goes, fire. Okay, I don't know if you'd call that facing your fears or not, but maybe he was the bravest one. If you're from Polish descent, I really apologize. I have nothing against Poles. I have no idea why Polish jokes ever hit the road anyway. But and so if you're here and you have Polish, come and tell me why that is the case. Okay, and maybe it's because I think I knew one guy in college that was Polish descent. And so come to think of it, maybe I do. No, I'm just kidding. So facing fear is something ultimately we can't avoid. It's something that we're, and just to kind of put this in context, let me just maybe mention some areas of fears, because there are what I would call super legitimate fears. Fear can be just good instincts. I mean, it can be a God-given instincts. And, I feel like fear of snakes is like, that's like so spiritual. It's just like God-given, and so, anybody ought to try to outrun a snake. Or of a dog that, is barking and acting like it's going to bite you and all that stuff. And so those are just good instincts. And then sometimes fear can be a deterrent. In other words, the Bible talks a lot about fearing God. And so if you don't have a healthy fear of certain things in life, you will probably die before you should. You know, I like to ride a motorcycle, but I don't do things that I see sometimes people do on motorcycles. I mean, I've been going down, the road in a car and had bikes go past me doing wheelies, on the interstate, like 80 miles an hour or whatever, going right down the interstate doing a wheelie. Well, I'm proud of them being so good and all that other stuff, but I'm also thinking they're going to become a heart donor sooner than later if they keep that up. And so, having some fears can be healthy. It can keep us from doing things that would be foolish, and so it can be a good deterrent. Fearing God, if you understand it properly, it means that we realize we're going to be accountable to God, and that if you know the Bible at all, God is well-rounded in the sense of He has all the components and elements that we have, plus more. In the sense, I think He's not opposed to fun. He created us with laughter, created us, and I think Jesus, you can look at His life and you see that. But I'm going to tell you, God's serious too. There are serious aspects of God, and if you don't take Him seriously, you will one day, because He is a God to be feared. He's revered and feared, and so that can help us in a healthy way to not destroy our own lives. And then I think fear can be disruptive. When fear is disruptive is whenever we allow our fears to begin to control our everyday behaviors. In the sense of, I'm not talking about a proper fear here, I'm talking about an improper kind of fear where, we begin to be afraid to do anything because we're afraid this might happen, that might happen. We can think of all the what ifs, and we live by the what ifs instead of living deliberately in a sense of focus and mission and faith. And then I think fear can be, for some people, completely debilitating. There's some people who get so deep down into their comfort zone and out of their fear that they just really won't venture out for anything. They won't venture out at all. And so it really literally becomes a debilitating thing. The Bible actually talks about fear about 365, I've seen some 385 times. I think because sometimes words are translated differently, it's a little hard unless you're willing to go in yourself and analyze all of that and then come up with all the different ones. It's a little bit hard to come up and say exactly how many times the concept of fear is mentioned in Scripture, but at least hundreds of times. And one of the things that, and I've mentioned this recently, but one of the things that strikes me whenever you're reading the Scripture, whenever we're told not to fear, there's generally a reason why you might want to be fearful. But we're told, even though there's a situation where by human standards, you could be fearful, don't fear, don't be afraid. And so anytime that I'm reading the Bible and it says, do not be afraid, I'm thinking, I need to get scared right now. I mean, it's like you're about ready to read something, you're about ready to see something, this guy is about ready to experience something that's very fearful. And so that could cause great fear. So there's that, it's almost like a warning sign. But what God keeps saying over and over to people in the Scripture is, even though you're going to face this experience, I'm with you, and because I'm with you, don't be fearful. If you just look at the top of your sheet, it's the memory verse or the little memory verse sheet beside you, it says this: even though I walk through the darkest valley, think of the darkest valley you've maybe ever walked through, or you could imagine walking through. It says, I will fear no evil. The psalmist is saying, I'm going to fear no evil. Now, he just said it's the darkest valley. I'll fear no evil. Why is it that God is able to encourage us not to live a fearful life in spite of the fact that we face fearful things? It's because of this. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. God has never promised us we would not experience trouble, difficulty, hardships, and even fearful situations in life. But He has also promised that He would be with us in the midst of those. And there are many, many examples in Scripture of that. I've experienced probably about, from a standpoint of being close to almost terrorized kind of fear, probably about 3 times in my life. And in hindsight, it's always to see a lot clearer that maybe we didn't have to experience, a person wouldn't have to experience that depth of fear. But at the same time, when we're in that moment, it's pretty overwhelming. And so when I talk about fear, I'm not a fearful person by nature. I'm not the kind of person that walks around, afraid in many situations. You know how whenever some people, it's wise. I mean, the number one way people burglarize homes is they walk in through unlocked doors. That's the number one. If you look that up or whatever, you'll find out what's the number one way people break in homes. Just walk through a door that's unlocked or a window that's unlocked. But I tend to, just in case anybody here thinking, oh, well, understand, I do lock my doors and windows, usually. But I'm not the kind of person who is paranoid about it, or I have to go around every night or whatever, and I'm thinking, and I know this is kind of like a dumb thought, but it's like, I'm just thinking, someone wakes me up in the middle of the night, rustling around in drawers. Man, I'm not big like Drew, but I can tell you this. You'd think I was Chuck Atlas made all over again or something, man. I'm taking a dresser, I'm dumping it on them. I'm gonna, they will, so I don't know why. I just think I'll beat the stew out of them. I don't care. I mean, I'll break. We have 4 posts. I'll break one of those posts over. They'll be sorry they came in my house. And so I kind of have that mindset. Now, honestly, I know if they have a gun and all that, by the time I find my gun and bullets and all that kind of stuff, I'd already be shot up pretty bad. But the deal is this. So I don't really go around fearful in the sense of like someone's going to get me or I'm going to, something's going to happen. And I'm aware of my circumstances, and I'm aware that, that if something happened, I'll try to manage the situation, that kind of thing. But so as a result, I could come off with this message today, just a bit of like, just get over it. Don't be afraid. But I need to tell you, I have had a few situations in life, and probably 3 where it was very close, almost felt a sense of terror personally in those settings. So I do know what it feels like to feel fear, significant fear that's kind of just like completely overwhelming, almost takes over. So I do understand that in a limited way, and so I do. In other words, if you're saying, well, Rod, you don't relate to how I'm really feeling, I may not in every situation, but I do know what intense fear does feel like. There are a lot of different lists of fears, and I'm just gonna. I was going to read you the names of them, but it won't do you any good. Some of you already know them, and I'd pronounce them wrong, and you're going, you didn't say that right, or whatever. So I'm just going to give you the top 10, just in plain English, not in the psychobabble terms of what they are. And so the 10th fear, which I was kind of surprised it was number 10, but it's the fear of death. And this isn't there are different lists that come off different ways, but most of them kind of fall in this category, in this general category. So number 10, fear of death. Fear of thunder and lightning, and if you're a guy here and, your little kid's not afraid and you crawl under the table, I know that's a little humiliating, but, like it's lightning and thunder. No, but, most of us, here's what I would say. I remember my grandmother used to have us sit down when it was lightning real bad. She would just have us sit down someplace. And I thought about that, and I thought about where was she coming from? And she's probably trying to keep us away from windows or whatever. And it wasn't even a fearful thing. It would almost seem like a respect thing. Just sit down, be calm, and this will pass. Fear of lightning, thunder and lightning. Fear of cancer. I thought, number 8, I thought that would be higher up on the list, or closer to the front. Fear of heights, number 7. I know I'm not terribly fearful of heights, but I can be driving over a really high bridge and something feels funny in my knees. Anybody else have that? And like my knees start feeling a little funny, so I just focus on the road and keep on going. I'm not sightseeing at that point. Fear of vomiting, number 6. I'm thinking I might have some of that. Man, I'll go to the ends of the world to keep from upchuck. I'll just I'll walk. Anyway. I'll put duct tape across my mouth. No, not quite, but. Fear of confined spaces. Most of us are familiar with that term, claustrophobia. You've heard of that. That's one we all know and well. You don't want to be on an elevator with someone with that, okay? It's like, because all of a sudden something happens, they start, especially if they're big at all, Fear of open spaces. That one kind of, I'm thinking, that should calm someone down, but everybody has their different fears, okay? So fear of open spaces. Maybe feel like, if there's something falling out of space, you're a good target or something. I don't know what brings that on, but fear of flying. Some of you fly almost kind of for a living. Some of you travel a lot, and so you've probably had some of those rougher experiences. I've had a couple of flying experiences where, because I had the seatbelt on, I didn't hit the head, hit the ceiling, but I thought I was going to a time or two. And it's like, in those, it's amazing the promises we make to God in that moment, isn't it? Like, God, if you just get me through this one. I've never said I won't fly again. I've said I'll think real seriously about flying again, because I'm pretty sure I probably will. But, and then the fear of people or social situations. And I'm assuming you don't have a high intense level of that, or you probably wouldn't be here this morning. So, and then, believe it or not, the one they put as number one, and this came to the top. I looked at several different lists, just like, you got to be kidding me. But fear of spiders is number one. Can I just see a hand here? Anybody afraid of spiders? Okay. I'm afraid of, Drew held his hand up. It's like, you got to be kidding me. He's like this big old huge dude, He's like, I'm afraid of spiders. I'd like to see that one. Christina, get the bug spray, Anyway, I'm sorry, Drew. I can't help it. It's like, he's 6'5" or something, and like, looks like Hercules. So like, that's good. That's like my father-in-law. He's about my size and at times been a little heavier than I am, and he's afraid of mice. And he just, he admitted, and he'll climb up on the sofa and go, Leela, his wife, get the mouse, And so we know these fear deals are real. We know it's real. And, and there's a lighthearted side to it, but there's a serious side to it as well. And I want to walk you through, we're in this series on the life of Joseph. I want to walk you through a few situations where Joseph faced some things that would have caused fear in any of us. And we may not face his exact scenario, but we face things that are similar to them. And so let's begin with number one on your sheet. And facing fear when someone wants to harm you. Now, most of us don't live under the threat of death. Most of us don't live there. Maybe, those of you that have been in the military and served overseas, or you are in the military, you've served overseas, you probably have felt some of these very intense feelings yourself, and maybe a few here. But most of us, we don't live in fear that someone's going to physically harm us or try to destroy us. But I would say this, and this is just from a standpoint of relating to our everyday lives, we can have fear that people are going to harm us by doing something to our reputation, or maybe in the job place, doing something that will affect your livelihood, or doing something that will affect your children. I mean, there are things that we can fear where people would cause some harm to us. Let's look at Genesis 37, verses 18 to 20. It says, but they saw him in the distance. This is the brothers who are out watching their sheep. And I'm not giving you the whole story here because we're going to be picking up different pieces of along the way. But so you have to kind of drop us in on these situations. So the brothers are out there. Joseph's father has sent him out to go ahead and check out what's going on with the brothers and see if they're okay. So these brothers saw him in the distance. And remember, we established pretty clearly last week that these brothers had begun to hate him. They could not say a kind word to him. I mean, they were totally in opposition to him and to their brother Joseph. And so they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Sound like nice brothers, huh? Here comes that dreamer. If you remember the dreams, in his dream, he was telling them they were all bowing down, even his mother and father bowing down to him. And so they said to each other, come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. And so these guys they literally did hate him. Hated him enough to kill him. And hate can lead to kill, and generally will in most cases, one way or another. It's slaughtering some person in some way, even their reputation, whatever. But they were so mad, they said, we'll kill you. Now, what I want to say is, when we are in those kinds of situations, Joseph knew they didn't like him. They knew whether he interpreted it completely, they hated him enough to kill him. It doesn't seem like in the story of him coming to him that he was afraid for his life. He went ahead and he approached them. And yet at the same time, I think he had to know he was not the favored brother. He may have been the favored son. He was not the favored brother. Because these guys, the scripture said, we looked at last week, they could not even say a kind word to him. I mean, everything that came out of their mouth to him was ugly, it was mean, it was malicious, or they maybe didn't even speak to him. And so I think he knew he was going into some hostile territory, probably not assuming that it was this hostile. And so what we don't know is, we don't have a lot of verbiage here about what he did in response. And certainly he was overpowered. There were 10 brothers there who overpowered him, and they controlled his situation, and so there's very little he could do. Whether he had tried to have a conversation with them, whether they tried to reason with them, we do not know. But here's what I want to say is this. There are times whenever I think if we know we're walking into harm's way, we know that someone is out to harm us, then it probably would be an appropriate thing for us to endeavor to remove ourselves from those situations where we truly are aware someone is out to get us, so to speak. To try not to get into those situations. And if you do, to endeavor to remove yourself as quickly as possible. And certainly we know when it comes down to a physical attack, oftentimes there's not a forewarning. But there are times whenever people will walk into situations where they know there's potential for harm to take place, and they'll go ahead and do it anyway. And I would just say to you, don't go there. You know, one of the things that Joseph maybe could have done was said, Dad, you've heard how these guys talk to me. I mean, you guys talk to me, talk about me, talk in front of me, talk, why are you sending me? We don't know that they had that discussion. He seemed to just go with what his dad said. I think there was a little bit of naivety on Joseph's part. I think he thought, well, they're ticked off and they're mad and they're all this stuff, but I don't think he took it seriously that maybe they would really harm him. What I would say is if people give you indication that they will harm you, believe them. Believe them. And I mean, who needs to test the theory? You know, if someone's threatening to you, don't go into a threatening situation. It's certainly not without the appropriate help. And so I was just, saying this, what can we learn from this? We can learn that his dad, I believe, and Joseph himself probably were not exerting the greatest amount of wisdom. And even though they didn't have reason to believe maybe that they would kill him, they certainly knew he was very disliked and very unwelcome in their presence. And so, I kind of have a theory of this, and that is, if I feel like someone isn't welcoming me, then I'm free to go. I mean, if I'm not welcome, I guess that means I'm free to go. And so, I've had a situation or two over the years where there was, a man who was, this many years ago, very early part of Westtown, a man was leaving his family. I didn't know all the details. I just simply had counseled with the man some and with him and his wife, and it just seemed like just crazy that he was just going to up and just really desert his family. So I was younger and probably bolder in some ways, maybe foolishly bold sometimes, and I, I'm thinking, well, God and we can fix anything, So I just set it up with his wife for her to leave at a certain point because he was going in the next couple of days, for her to leave, and I showed up. And I sat down with him, and he respected me enough at least to open the door, let me in, and we sat down. And I just went straight for it. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And for the next hour and a half, I just tried to reach in and grab a hold of him, shake some sense into him. And after about 30 minutes, for the rest of the time I was there, he would look at me and he would listen. He'd go, leave now. And I'm thinking, I haven't broke through yet, so I keep trying to break through. Well, guess what? I eventually left, and he left the next couple of days just like he was planning to, and I've never heard from the man since. Never. He didn't want me there. He didn't want to hear what I had to say. He started telling me he didn't want me there. He started telling me he didn't want to hear what I had to say. He had already made up his mind. It didn't matter. There was no discussion, anything else. And somehow I thought, boy, God and I could break through that. We could just break through. I think what God was saying, if you'd get out of the way, maybe someday I'll break through. But now you're building a wall. It's so big. I mean, I don't know when he'll be broken through too. And so sometimes, if you're not welcome, don't go. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go anyway. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to, and Celebrate Recovery helps us understand some of this sometimes. And sometimes people may wander away and they wander far. And sometimes they can feel like, well, nobody chased me down. Nobody tackled me and drugged me back in there. So, so I guess I'm not welcome. No, the welcome mat is out. But what we have learned is you can't make anybody do anything that they don't want to do. And so, if you've got people in your life that are hostile towards you, just give them a break, give them time. Don't do it with a bad attitude. Don't go tell them, I'm writing you off. You don't have to tell them that. You don't even have to write them off. Just give them running space. Just give them running space. And let them know you love them and you care about them. And it's possible someday they'll come back. It's possible they won't. But I can promise you chasing them down and berating them and trying to fix them and everything else, it will only make them dislike whatever it is they're disliking right now more. Number 2, when you're totally out of your comfort zone. Now, we put tests in these outlines sometimes, so we did this just to see if anybody caught this. So when you are totally out of your comfort zone, if you're out of your comfort zone, then you're out of your comfort zone, But anyway, you can use it like that, or you can put your in there however you want to do it. I mean, we're in Georgia. Everything goes, So, I mean, it's, I know a lot of you aren't from Georgia. Sorry about that. But anyway, so this is a test, see if you're paying attention. When you're totally out of your comfort zone, let's look at the story as it goes on here, and we jump down some verses to 26, 28. It says, Judah said to his brothers, he's one of these 10 brothers out here, what will we gain if we kill our brother? Hey, this isn't about, wonder how he'll feel. No, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on, let's be sensible here. Let's just sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. I mean, let's be nice to this kid. I mean, after all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. Like as if I'm going to sell him as a slave. I'm not going to kill him and sell him as a slave. Now, he may be treated awfully, he may be tortured, he may be beat, he may be killed in someone else's hand. But, hey, he's our brother. At least we can do sell him as a slave. Why kill a guy? I mean, who needs relatives like that? I mean, if you have relatives like that, you need to get adopted or something. You need to get into a new family. That's pretty serious stuff. They're going to kill him, and they're going like, no, that would be bad. Let's sell him as a slave. Let's do something nice for the kid. I mean, he is our brother. Yeah, I mean, he belongs to our family. Let's sell him as a slave. Like they really nicened it up a lot. And so when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Now, you talk about a shift. Joseph had been, up till this time of him meeting his brothers, he was wearing this colorful coat from Saks Fifth Avenue or wherever his dad had it made from or wherever, And he's out here parading his way up to his brothers, and of course, they grab him, throw him in this well, and or in a cistern. Then they grab him out and they sell him as a slave. Now, you have to understand, I wasn't there and I don't know what happened, but these guys were merchants, They were buying and selling stuff. And so they probably had some goats, maybe a few other things. And they're like, in that goat pen back here, we got space for like one more body. Let's shove him in there. They handcuff him, or tie his hands behind his back, shove him in there with the goats. And he rides all the rest of the way into Egypt with the goats. Now, I don't know that, but I just suspect, or maybe they tied him on top. He's getting sunburned on one side, like at least going, could you roll me over the other side? I'm kind of getting burned on this side. I don't have my coat to cover up. This guy went from being privileged by his father to now being owned as a slave. You talk about changing your comfort zone, really being out of your comfort zone. He was way, way out. And I just think for most of us, there are situations that happen in life that can throw us entirely out of our comfort zone. We can just be absolutely thrown from what seems to be like this world is my world to all of a sudden this crazy world is my world. It can happen through death, it can happen through divorce, it can happen through all kinds of life critical crisis situations where we can be, a loss of a job. We can be in one situation, one moment, and then all of a sudden we're thrust into another. And because we don't hear a lot of what's going on inside of Joseph's mind and brain at this time, we're left to our own imagination a little bit. But I can imagine that bouncy, bumpy ride from that point to Egypt. There were an awful lot of thoughts that went through Joseph's mind. How could this be happening to me? What went wrong? Why did they hate me so bad? How am I going to get out of this? And so this idea, this awareness, this understanding, things are dramatically different. I am in a situation I know nothing about. I've been a freelancer, so to speak. I represented my dad to my brothers, I'd come back and tell on them for the bad things they were doing. I'd come out and check on them, make sure they had, I was just like, and I had pretty fine clothes on top of that. I don't know what he was wearing then, but it probably wasn't much of anything. Strapped down on this caravan, headed to Egypt. If you've ever been thrown out of your comfort zone, you know it can be terrorizing. And there's one thing that I know Joseph did do, and I would recommend it to you. He held steady. He maybe didn't have much of a choice, but he held steady. There's sometimes that this is advice that I give that I don't like giving, and I don't like giving it to myself or hearing it from someone else, but it may be the only advice that's worthwhile in some situations, especially when we're thrown completely out of our comfort zone. Hold steady. Hold steady. There's a reason why when people go into a period of grief, people say, don't make any significant life-changing decisions for about a year. Because we've been thrown completely from one world into another. And so what happens is we're in a new world. We're out of our comfort zone. Hold steady. Hold steady. And that's true in all of the crises. I've watched people go through divorces and live in a high reactionary mode, trying to get back into some kind of a comfort zone. The problem with that is that oftentimes if you jump fast, you find yourself in as bad or a worse situation as you came from. Hold steady. Joseph didn't have a choice but to hold steady. We have a choice in most of our cases. I recommend it. Number 3, facing fear when you have no control over your circumstances. Genesis chapter 39 says this. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. Blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. Now, we're going to look at the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife coming up in a couple weeks, and we're going to talk about that end of it. We're really just talking about this realization that Joseph, he was a slave. As a slave, his owner began to realize everything this guy touches, it works. Everything that he's doing, it improves. It gets better. So he ended up making him his personal assistant. And so then ultimately where Joseph was really in charge of his whole household, he was running everything. And because of that, everything that Potiphar had both in his house and his field, was blessed. It had this blessing on it. Here's what I want to encourage you to understand is, even though he had no control over his circumstances, the fact that he was a slave and that he could not manage his own life in the sense of making decisions to work here, work there, live here, live there. He had to live where he was told. He had to work where he was told to. He had to do what he was told to do. He was under complete constraints, but within that, there was one thing he could control. He could control his relationship with God, and he could control his outlook and his attitude. And it appears from everything that I see, this is one of those things, I'm glad everybody in the Bible wasn't like Joseph, because I would feel like an absolute failure if everybody was as good as he is. This guy, he was in these most adverse circumstances. He had no control over circumstances, but in the midst of circumstances he was not in control of, he kept his relationship with God active, and that's obvious. You don't have to read too much even between the lines there to see that. And because you say, if his master could see that the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, if his master saw that, it wasn't Joseph going around going, well, I had my devotions for an hour this morning, and I'm really close to God, by the way, and and I observe the commandments of God, and he wasn't going around. He was obvious. This is a person who's a God follower, and it shows up, and it seems to be making a difference somewhere in his life. And so he had no control over circumstances, but I'm going to tell you what he had control over: his relationship with God. He had his control, and when I say control, I don't mean he's in control of God. I mean the choice to be in that relationship with God, to keep it active. He had that choice. He had a choice about his attitude, he had a choice about his outlook on life. And obviously he was managing that quite well. And here's what I want to tell you. You may be in circumstances you wouldn't choose, because we don't always get to choose our circumstances. Sometimes they're chosen for us. You don't get to choose what family you're born into. You do get to choose your spouse, so you're to blame for that one, okay? But you don't really get to choose who your children are. Oh yeah, you choose to have children, but you really don't get to choose their personality. You don't really get to choose their whether they're strong-willed or compliant. You don't get to choose that, And so there's so many things in life that we're engaged in, that we're part of, that we have no control over. But there is something we always have control over: whether we're going to stay in an active, living relationship with God, whether we're going to have a good outlook, whether we're going to have a good attitude or not, wherever we are and whatever we're doing. And I'm going to tell you that if you could be in a good situation, and if you don't manage that well, it'll turn into a bad situation. You could be in a bad circumstance, and if you'll choose that bad circumstance will get better. Doesn't mean everybody around you will get fixed. Doesn't mean everybody and everything will get fixed. But I'm going to tell you, you can enjoy today and you can enjoy tomorrow, whether the circumstances, the people around you in your life are choosing to enjoy them or not. You can still choose that. Joseph obviously made that choice, and it made such a difference that it caught everybody's eye around him. Number 4, facing fear when you feel forgotten by God and people. Now, we're going to get into the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife 2 weeks from now. So because of that situation, he was thrown in the king's prison, or he was really probably thrown in where Potiphar's prison was, because he was the captain of the guard. Potiphar was. But anyway, here's what happens when he gets thrown in prison. This goes back up to the circumstances. Really, even increased negative circumstances. But here's what happens. The prison guard, the guy in charge, or the head warden of the prison, he literally saw everything that Joseph was doing worked, and everybody worked with him and everything. So he actually put him in charge. He went on vacation. No, he didn't leave, but he just sat in the office, feet propped up all day, going, I'll just let Joseph handle. So Joseph handled the prison. Well, while he's in there, he had a couple guys. One was the king's cupbearer. Another was the king's chief cook. And they had dreams. They told Joseph their dreams, and he interpreted them. One of them probably wished he hadn't asked for the interpretation, because he got killed. He said, you're going to die. You're going to be killed. And the other one, he said, you're going to be restored. He was restored. But so here's what Joseph says to him, to this guy who's going to be restored. He goes, hey, listen, buddy, when all goes well with you, this is Genesis 40, 14, 15. When all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. So Joseph wasn't down in the prison going, boy, I'm really enjoying this. Now I got to be I'm having all these great experiences. I get to be as a slave. I'm in charge of Potiphar's house. Now I'm in prison. Look, I get to be in charge in prison. He's not down there having a party going, this is awesome. He's not doing that. He's going, get me out of this place. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, which makes me think he did put up a fight. I'm thinking his brothers are going, all right, we're selling you, buddy. You know, have a good life. Hey, that bowing down stuff and everything, we'll see how that works out, slave. And Joseph's going, man, you're not taking me anyplace. He obviously put up a little bit of a fight. It says he was forcibly taken. They carried off from the land of the Hebrews. And even here, I've done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. He's going, look, man, I've just told you your life's going to be saved. You're going to go back and be the cupbearer for the king. Hey, look me in the eyes right here. I don't deserve to be here any more than you deserve to be here. Remember me. Say a good word. You're sitting there drinking all that stuff, eat that stuff, hand it to Pharaoh. Somewhere in the conversation, get me in there. Talk to him about me. Look what happens. Genesis 40, verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. What a nice guy. I mean, who needs friends like that? We're talking about you don't need family like that. Who needs a friend like this, man? Like helping a guy with a flat tire, and the next day he drives by and you got a flat tire and he's waving at you. Hey, hope you get it fixed okay, buddy. My life's okay. I don't really care about you. Forgot about him. Forgot about him. Be honest with yourself in this moment right here. Have you, and don't raise your hand, have you ever felt like God has forgotten you? Have you ever felt like people have forgotten you? Here's what I want to tell you. Even though this guy had forgotten Joseph, at the right time, God reminded him. And I don't know what will happen with the people in your life, but here's what I want to tell you. I don't have time to give you a whole sermon on this because we're wrapping up now. But I have to say this to you to be faithful to the God that we serve, and that is this. I absolutely guarantee you, based on who God has revealed himself to be to us through the scripture and through the person of Jesus Christ, he has not forgotten you. I believe it's very possible to feel forgotten by God. Very, very possible. All of us probably have felt that sometime. But I want to tell you, if God's word has any truth in it whatsoever, and the truth about God is real, God has not forgotten about you, even though it seems like it. Number 5, facing fear when you face your greatest opportunity. Do you know some people they fear success as much as they fear failure. Some people fear success more than they feel failure. And so understand, sometimes God will give you an opportunity and we just kind of back away from it and going, I couldn't do that. I can't do that. This is his greatest opportunity. Listen to this, Genesis 41. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and you have to understand, God prompted the guy's memory whenever the Pharaoh had a dream. And so he mentioned him. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. I love this next part because it just tells you how he was living in that dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. I mean, he probably was stinking pretty bad. Probably had a pretty serious growth of beard, probably made yours look pretty wimpy, Brandon, when you had your big thick one. And, and you too, Kenny. But anyway, I mean, he had a bad, he probably would have fit right in with Duck Dynasty. He had this bad boy beard going on or something. They had to shave him up, kind of clean him up. And they put some fresh clothes on him, get him out of those dirty, grungy prison clothes. And you notice it keeps saying dungeon here too. Pharaoh says to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you, when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And I'm thinking, man, Joseph, this is your golden opportunity right here, right now. And listen what he says. I can't do it. You can't do it, Joseph. You've just been given this golden opportunity, and you're saying, no, I can't do that. I cannot do that. Listen to the rest, though. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. You know what that tells me about Joseph? And you see it over and over and over again in here. He doesn't take credit for things that can only come from God. You know, sometimes, it's human nature. Something great happens. Maybe sometime we've prayed for someone for a long time and they get saved. We just can't help ourselves. I prayed for that person 10 years and they got saved. Like, they got saved because you prayed. I'm sure that aided it. I'm sure that helped it. But God's the one who saved them. Understand, you can't save people. You can pray for them, and yes, your prayers are very effective and they can work greatly and people will get saved. But he didn't go, yeah, I can do that. He goes, no, I can't do it, but God can. And yes, he has used me before, but understand it's God. This isn't something I'm capable of. He's not going to take personal credit here. And if he wouldn't be able to interpret the dream in the first place. But he understood that. He knew that his confidence was in God. And I'm going to tell you, whatever fear we face, we've got to build a strong confidence in God. Because it's only with God's help that we can work through the valley of the shadow of death, the hard, dark times where fear is very real and oppressing. It's only where great opportunity comes our way, and we have this great opportunity to do great things that we submit to God in his power in those too. We put him in his rightful place. It's only that tremendous faith in what God can do in carrying us through the hard times and help us to succeed in the greatest opportunities of life. Genesis 41, again, dropping down to 41 verse, says, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, he says, after the whole dream thing, I don't have time to take you through the whole dream thing. I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Wow. I want to give you a verse you can jot down at the bottom of your sheet. I'm not going to take you to it. I'm not going to read it to you. But I'm going to tell you, this verse of scripture has meant a lot to me in those 3 crisis times in my life where fear was very overwhelming. And I've been very, very grateful for these 2 verses that God has ministered into my heart in those moments where it felt like panic would take over and fear would win. It's Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 25 and 26. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 25 and 26. If you're afraid of success or you're afraid of failure or you have some fears that are eating away at you right now, I strongly encourage you to read this entire passage here in Genesis, but also to go to Proverbs chapter 3, verses 25 and 26 and claim them personally. Let God activate it in your life. Let's pray.